Evil Dead Rise might be the goriest and scariest movie in the entire Evil Dead franchise. But does all of that actually make it a good movie? Well, let's talk about it. What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here. And in Evil Dead Rise, we follow Beth as she visits her older sister Ellie, who is raising 3 kids all by herself in a broke down LA apartment. The reunion is cut short when a mysterious book unleashes an ancient demonic presence, and Beth and her family have to fight to survive against horrific and seemingly insurmountable odds. So for those that are unfamiliar with the Evil Dead franchise as a whole, this is the 5th installment in the series. As far as movies are concerned, there's also a TV show, which is pretty good, but it is only the 2nd movie in kind of the modern revival of the Evil Dead franchise. And kind of like the last movie in the series that we got, this one really does stand on its own. So although you don't have to watch the prior Evil Dead movies before watching this one, I would still recommend it because they're all pretty good. Now, this one is written and directed by Lee Cronin, whose name you might not be super familiar with. He is a newer writer-director. In fact, this is only his 2nd feature film. His first one was a movie called, I believe, The Hole in the Ground, which received very positive reviews. Now, as I do with all my reviews, I'm going to go over the positives first, tell you the things I did like about the movie, then of course the negatives, and then finally break down who I think this movie is for. If that kind of thing sounds good to you and you want to see more movie reviews just like this, make sure you subscribe. Now, right off the bat, I want to let you know, for those that are familiar with the Evil Dead franchise, a lot of the movies have a fair bit of humor incorporated into them, and some of them are just straight up slapstick comedy. I'm looking at you, Army of Darkness. This movie, however, is much more in line with the 2013 Freddy Alvarez movie, in that it is almost entirely a straight up horror movie with little bits of very, very dark humor sprinkled throughout. So just understand that going into it. Now, speaking of that balance between horror and comedy, Lee Cronin absolutely nails it in this movie, in my opinion. It's funny, after we got out of watching the movie, my girlfriend said that it might be the scariest movie she's ever seen. And although I wouldn't necessarily say that for myself, it is downright horrific in a lot of ways. But even still, there were more than a few moments throughout the movie where the audience that I was with just busted out laughing. And I feel like it takes a lot of expertise to do something that is both horrific and funny. But again, Lee Cronin knocks it out of the park. Also, on a more technical level, the shot selection, the cinematic choices are, wow, chef's kiss. I honestly didn't expect that level of quality going into this movie, but hot damn. It really reminds me of Sam Raimi's style in ways, or I should say his level of creativity with his shots. If you've seen a lot of Sam Raimi movies, you know what I'm talking about. But that's not to say that Lee aped his style. It's really his own style, and you could just tell that he was thinking outside the box with a lot of the shots that he chose. In addition to just the shot choices, the sound effects, the sound design, as well as the practical gore effects were wild. Evil Dead movies do tend to go over the top with a lot of their sound design and a lot of their gore, and I really feel like this movie takes it to a whole nother level. The sound effects will absolutely make your skin crawl, and as far as the practical effects and the gore, well, let's just say you don't want to be eating while you watch this movie. I also really love the casting choices. Alyssa Sutherland, who plays the mom and the first person to be possessed, as you see in the trailers, she is phenomenal. She was both terrifying and sweet at the same time, which is a weird thing to say. A lot of her movement and facial expressions playing this just grotesque possessed creature were shockingly good. But then at the same time, she can play this sweet mother who is just trying to do what's right by her 3 kids, and you believe that as well. You also have Lily Sullivan, who plays her sister, the aunt to the kids in the movie. And first off, those 2 actresses look very similar. I totally buy that they're siblings. But Lily Sullivan is also fantastic. She carries a lot of the emotional weight of the movie, whether it's the fear of what's going on around her, her desire to protect her sister's children, and also kind of the badass nature of most of the protagonists in Evil Dead movies. There's always a little bit of them kicking ass that you want to see, and she really sells that as well. Also, I should say the kids are great in this too, especially Nell Fisher, who plays the youngest sibling. I think this was her acting debut. I think I remember them introducing Nell Fisher in the credits. I thought she did a phenomenal job, and her character and the way she plays that character just makes you really feel bad for her throughout the movie and makes you want to make sure that she's protected. I also love what they do with the lore surrounding the Necronomicon. If you're not familiar with Evil Dead movies, that is the Book of the Dead that kind of is the core of every single one of these movies. They do a lot with kind of diving into the lore of the book and really piquing at least my interest in wanting to know more about its history. I want to know about the people that have uncovered it before and what happened to them. You hear little bits and pieces throughout all of the movies, but there's just so much there. There's such a well of stories that can be told. And this does a really good job of not just focusing on this one family story, but stirring up your interest in the other people that have also encountered this book. And honestly, as long as they're going to keep presenting this level of quality in the Evil Dead franchise, I think they could just keep this series running indefinitely. Finally, as far as the positives, I'll say the movie is just over 90 minutes, so just over an hour and a half, and it moves at such a pace that by the time the movie was over, I was exhausted emotionally. From the moment that the Necronomicon is read until the credits begin, there is not a moment to breathe, and it is fantastic. Now, of course, as with any movie, there are going to be a couple of cons, a couple of things that I have to nitpick about, so let's go ahead and get into those real quick. For one, there are a couple of scenes in this movie that it really bookends the movie, the beginning and the end, and they don't really matter to the rest of the film. They're cool scenes, don't get me wrong, but it just has nothing really to do with the rest of the movie. So it was kind of a waste of time. You could have probably shaved off 10 minutes or so there. And also, and probably the biggest issue that I have with the movie is that it doesn't obey its own rules. Now, this is a big issue that I have with a lot of high concept films, and maybe I'll do a video on this as an idea, because I definitely have a few movies where they just break their own rules and don't really make any sense. But in this one, there are just a few bits and pieces where it doesn't really obey its rules, or in some cases, which I can forgive a little bit more, it changes the rules of the prior films. But again, if you're looking at this as its own side story, not necessarily exactly tied into the prior movies, then it's fine. But even within this movie, there is a moment in particular that I'm thinking of that I don't want to spoil for you, where something happens to a person that should have a certain effect on them, but it just doesn't. And there's no reason given for that. I don't think it's going to bother most people, but if you are a stickler for continuity, then it might bug you just a bit. But aside from that, I thought this movie was fantastic. So who do I think this is for? Okay, well, one, if you are a horror fan at all, I think you're going to get a lot of enjoyment out of this movie, unless you're just a negative Nancy, in which case there's nothing I can do for you. Also, if you haven't really seen very many horror movies, I think this is a fantastic one to check out. It is going to be super intense, so fair warning about that. But if you're interested in dipping your toes a little bit more into horror, definitely watch this one. The only person I wouldn't recommend this to is someone who just straight up doesn't like horror movies. And if that's you, you know who you are. If you don't like gore, if you get weirded out by like demonic possession movies, then just don't watch it. But even if you're just slightly willing to test out the waters of movies like this, the level of quality that you're getting here is so high. Honestly, and I can say this straight up, this is the best horror movie I have seen in quite some time. So I absolutely recommend you check it out. Now, again, is it the best Evil Dead movie? Well, if you want to know the answer to that, you got to make sure you subscribe, because I will have my Evil Dead ranking video out in the next day or two. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications by ringing the little bell below so that you can be here when that video goes live. Also, real quick, if you want to support me and the channel here, besides subscribing, the best way to do that is through my Amazon affiliate link. I'm currently just a little channel. I don't even have 1,000 subscribers yet, so I'm not monetized. The only way I can make any money through the channel is if you plan on buying anything on Amazon, you go through that affiliate link in the description box. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and it just gives me a little kickback. So if you do, I appreciate it. Otherwise, I'll catch you in the next one. All right, be good.